of speech technology. Today, she'll be talking about a very good, very interesting project on localizing the Mozilla Common Voice platform for South Africa's official languages. And just for context again, in this seminar series, Febe will give her talk. After this, once her talk is done, you'll be able to ask questions, and then that typically is in the last 15 minutes or so. And yeah, we really look forward to having these interactions. We do record this, and the recording will be made available online afterwards. And I'll share some links to the YouTube channel later on, because you can then go off and then see all the previous seminar series. This, like the 2022 one, I think at the moment it keeps on getting better and better, and I'm really thankful for the speakers. I'm really thankful also for the people who come in for the seminar. So yeah, thank you, Febe. You can go ahead, I guess, unmute and then share your screen.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And Bukuzi, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for organizing these meetups, for getting some life into the community, for getting us together to talk about important things. As Bukuzi said, I am Febe De Wet. I'm currently with the School for Electronic and Computer Engineering at the Northwest University in Potchefstroom. And I'll be talking about the localization of the Mozilla Common Voice platform for South Africa's official languages. And it seems as if this is an extremely recurring theme in the research that I do. Last night when I was preparing, I realized that some of my papers have actually appeared in a previous century, and that made me feel extremely old. But it seems like we keep going back to the same limitations. If we want to develop speech technology, we need to find and create the data. So the very first set of data that I created was for my master's, as I said, in the previous century. And we were trying to develop a voice interface for an automatic English isiXhosa dictionary. And since then, we've basically been playing catch up. Once we had enough data to build a fairly reasonable telephone system, the goalposts changed to broadband data. Just when we had enough data to build a reasonable HMM system in all of our 11 languages, the new era of deep learning dawned on us. And again, appropriate data is a limitation and something that keeps us busy. Let me just... So I am presenting today, but a few people have helped me so far. Andiswa Bukula from Sadilar, Roald Island and Martin Putkammer, who work at CText. Willem Karsten and Irwin Schilak are two of my students at Northwest University. And with many of the practical things, Renee Wieringa from the Virtual Institute for Afrikaans has also been assisting. So thank you to these people. And before I say anything else, and I'll say it a few times so that you remember, it's not a Stellenbosch or a Febe De Wet or a Northwest project. This really is a community-driven effort. I've tried to make a good start, but the rest of the project is really up to all of us and how we use this opportunity. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. It's an initiative that was set up by the Mozilla Foundation, and the aim is to teach machines how real people speak, and that's probably what I've been trying to do for the last 30 odd years. And as I said, they sort of face the same challenges that I did, because if you want to develop this type of technology, you need data. There are huge data sets out there. I think the biggest ones are all proprietary. And for open source and research development, there really aren't many big open source data sets available. So the idea behind the project is that language communities can donate their voices to an open source database. From time to time, they have official releases of the data. But in between, it's up to whoever wants to donate to make a contribution in their language of choice. Everything in the dataset is available under Creative Commons 0.0, which means open, freely accessible to everybody. It is a good thing, but there are also some challenges associated with that, and I'll get back to that in a minute. Also important is that the peer evaluation for quality assurance is also self-driven, so the community needs to take care of it. Mozilla doesn't provide any funding for the project. It makes the platform freely available, but other than that, there's no funding from Mozilla's side. And they also don't actively organize data collection campaigns. There are big online communities. They are quite active. They're extremely helpful, but it's up to local communities to get going and to make sure that the data gets collected. So how does it work? You can donate or you can assist the initiative in two ways. You can speak, so you can donate your voice. This is what you'll see on the website. And then there's a little microphone. You choose your language at the right corner of the page. There's a drop-down list of languages. You click on the microphone to speak. That takes you to a page with a few sentences. And then you read the sentence on the screen and you submit your recording. If the sentence is such that you feel you would rather not have that sentence spoken in your own voice, you can also just skip and go on to the next sentence. The other way in which you can assist is with the quality assurance. So everybody who has made a donation, that data doesn't automatically just appear on the website. So also if you do make contributions and you don't immediately see your contribution, it hasn't been lost or stolen, it just needs to be validated. So from these recordings, you can again choose your language, then click the play icon. The recording that was made previously is played back to you. Like I sound like the Skype lady. And then if you are happy that it was a good attempt at pronouncing that specific utterance, you can approve it and it gets updated into the database. Right, but now what if the language that you want to donate data in is not in that drop-down list? There are already quite a few languages in the list, but in terms of our South African languages, I think the only language you can contribute to is English. And as far as I know, there's not a specific variant category for South African English. So that's the situation that we are trying to address. And that is why this project is all about localization. And hence the topic or the topic of today's talk is all about what are we doing. So localization requires two things. It requires a translation of the Common Voice website, not every single word on it. There are specific pages that require to be translated before you can localize in a specific language. And the other one that is a slightly bigger challenge is to provide these sentences that people can read. You have to elicit speech in one way or another, and the sentences are used as prompts so that they can appear on the screen and people can choose to read them or skip them. And if you have 5,000 sentences available under CC0, then the language is launched, which basically means if you click on speak, then the language will appear in the drop-down list in the right-hand corner of the page, which we just talked about. The CC0 restriction is quite a strict one, and so far we haven't been able to reach that. So let me tell you what we have done. So the project under which all of this is happening is the Voices of Mzansi, and as just before this meeting, our first batch of banners and flyers were delivered. So hopefully you'll see the banner around at conferences and the web and whatever. And the funding is provided by the Fair Forward project. That's part of GIZ, the German association. It's a German government department, and they focus specifically on international collaboration. And then the project started off while I was still at Stellenbosch University, so that's why their logo is there. I'm collaborating with Sadilar, and then the project also aligns with the aims of the United Nations Decade of Indigenous Languages, where the aim is to make sure that no language is left behind. If I remember correctly, that was also a theme in last week's colloquium. Meta has a whole initiative around that and around machine translation and making sure that no language is left behind. So Voices of Mzansi really just refer to this localization effort, making sure that all our languages appear in that drop-down menu. And then hopefully next year, we'll also be organizing a few dedicated data collection campaigns, just to make sure that the community participation at least gets going. And what have we done so far? We organized, or we arranged and managed the website to be translated from English into the 10 other official languages. And for that, we had to use Pontoon. Pontoon is Mozilla's online translation system. We also had the translations proofread by an independent translation agency, and we asked them to QC the formatting of the website, because how Pontoon works is there are lists of words that get translated, the content basically that appears on the website. And once the content has been translated, then the websites get generated automatically by some process in the background. And some of the feedback that we've had actually indicates that the current way that these things are done, for instance, don't accommodate the noun class agreements that are inherent in the Nguni languages. So if a word is translated in isolation and then it's used again in a sentence in a different place, it doesn't always happen correctly because the noun classes have not been taken into consideration. And we are in discussion with Pontoon. There's actually a Pontoon localization translation workshop that's organized on the 3rd of December. If anybody's interested in attending that, please let me know. It's again, it's an open community thing. It's nobody in particular's project. And we are aware of some of these limitations. Another incident or something that was reported back about the website QC, in the languages that are written conglomeratively, sometimes you have really long words and some of those don't display really elegantly on the screen. So for now, we have to live with those limitations, I think, but we are reporting back to Pontoon and to the Mozilla community and flagging these issues that are particular to our languages. Okay, and then the line that made Vukosi giggle just before we started the presentation when we were testing the screen sharing is the search for appropriate CC0 text. And that has been quite a challenge, I think, as most of you already know. So what did we do? We started off with the tools provided by Mozilla. They have a text harvesting tool that you can use, that one can use to harvest text from Wikipedia. First issue we ran into is that many of our languages use diacritics, and diacritics are not allowed in the as is or the off-the-shelf version of the tools. So we had to make a few modifications to make sure that all our languages are allowed. One of the restrictions inherent in the tools is that you can harvest 3 sentences from any Wikipedia page, provided that the number of sentences is bigger than 10. And for many of our languages, there seems to be a fairly strong Wikipedia presence, but then once you start looking at the pages themselves, many of the pages contain 1 or 2 sentences, and some of the sentences are things like 3 is the number after 4, 5 is the number before 6, and so on and so on. The other issue is that for a new language, one can specify a list of forbidden words or potentially offensive languages, potentially offensive phrases, and so on. And to start off with, we didn't use such a list because we only had the list for 1 or 2 languages. So we wanted to get an idea of the type of text that you would collect if you don't have a list like that. Okay, and then of everything on all of the text that we collected in that way, we performed automatic text-based language identification and only kept the sentences that were identified as being, or that were reliably identified as being in the target language. The results were rather disappointing, which I guess was not a big surprise, but we only managed, or for none of the languages, and we are talking about all 10 in it, or not English because that is not part of our project, but in none of the 10 languages we could actually come up with a list of more than 1,000 sentences harvested from Wikipedia. And I mean, our target is 5,000, and ultimately the target really is as many as possible. I spoke to a German colleague who trained up a baseline system on the German version of the Common Voice dataset, and he discovered that while they've got thousands of hours of speech, after the first 5,000 sentences, there wasn't really a concerted effort to contribute additional sentences. So in this huge data set of speech, you get the same sentences being read over and over again. So it really makes sense not to just aim for the first 5,000 to get your language in the drop-down menu, but to try and keep that pool of sentences growing. The most shocking result, I think, was that isiNdebele does not have a presence on Wikipedia. So there was no data for isiNdebele. And Rualtu from CTEX that I mentioned at the beginning, he's running a huge harvesting project on the Common Crawl dataset. And because isiNdebele is not on Wikipedia, you also can't find isiNdebele in Common Crawl because their language identification is based on Wikipedia presence. So there are these inherent assumptions that sort of make languages that are not on Wikipedia just disappear. And of course, that's something that we would like to change. Okay, we didn't give up. We tried to look at other sources that are available. For instance, the Leipzig set of corpora, Opus, which is a parallel set of corpora. And then we also looked at the Flores dataset that was created for machine translation benchmarking. We used the same set of Mozilla tools, and we restricted ourselves to harvesting less than 10% of any particular document, which, and Vukosi, maybe this is a point for discussion at the Indaba or the legal meeting next year. If you use less than 10% of any document, it's still regarded as fair use. But I've also been told that this point has never really been litigated in South Africa, and I don't want to be the first person who goes to court about that. So that was just a restriction that we used. All of the data was sentence separated. We compiled frequency lists of sentences, ordered them by frequency of appearance. And all of you who have looked at web text will know this, some lines contain only a phone number, only an email address, numeric data that doesn't really mean much. We also discarded sentences that are not well-formed. And in this case, well-formed means it starts with a capital and it ends with some kind of punctuation. There are some guidelines in the Mozilla community. There was a huge project on harvesting data from the European Parliament. And from their experience, we placed a limit on sentences to have between 3 and 14 words with an absolute character limit of 99. Of course, you want these sentences to be readable. You don't want people to faint when the prompt comes up on the screen for reading. We used CTEXT's online available spell checkers, which are available in all 10 target languages, and we only retained the sentences that were regarded as being correctly spelled in 80% of the cases. Of course, before we did spell checking, we also did language identification to make sure that the appropriate spell checkers are used. And then something that is fairly obvious as soon as you have this data available and it's been frequency sorted and so on is that there is overlap between these online data sources. So we used Levenstein edit distance to calculate the similarity between individual sentences. And we only retained sentences if a specific sentence did not overlap with another sentence by less than 70%. Right, so what did that result in? We found Isindebele, for which we are very grateful. So at least all 10 languages are there now. But we only ended up with 2 languages where we had more than 5,000 sentences to work with. At the end of the process, it seems as if one should be a little less strict with the selection process initially, maybe slightly transgress over the fair use line to make sure that by the time that you've done all this cleaning up of the data, that there's more to choose from. Of the 5,000 sentences, we did discover, however, that okay, so for some of the languages, we had these lists of potentially offensive words. And when you do look for those words, they definitely occur in the corpus. And that means for the languages where we don't have those lists, we can't just make the data available because, you know, if people end up seeing the wrong sentences, they may just never contribute to the platform any further. And despite our very best efforts, and I think this is as a result of just the character of these online data sets, it's still dominated to a large extent by religious material, the Bible, Watchtower, and government documentation. So some of the sentences are readable, but the typical sentence that appears in a government brochure is not something, you know, that has a very friendly readability index. And it's not the type of language that one really would want. So what next? And I think something that deserves priority and that I'm trying to find people to collaborate on is to make sure that we have appropriate filter lists for all 10 languages, so that we don't just make sure that we have user-friendly text in the languages that we know and for which we already have these lists. And I mean, it's not something that you just wake up one morning and think, okay, today I need to compile a list of all the nasty words in Chivenda, but from a text sourcing and a text presenting point of view, it really is important. We would really like to start getting people involved, different communities from everywhere. As I said, the platform is open to everybody to participate in. I've been involved in speech collection projects before, and usually these were run by a specific institute and the funding came from a specific government department. And in the end, it really was difficult to meet all of the requirements set by the funder, but still get everybody involved and make sure that contribution is open. So that's one of the reasons why I'm particularly motivated about the Mozilla platform, because it is open to participation by absolutely anybody. It's a community thing, and we really need, I would really like to see as many people as possible getting involved. And every language really needs at least one champion. I've seen this often. I know in these deep learning big data days, you know, you just add data and problem is solved. But in my opinion, language is different. It really helps a lot if you are proficient in the language that you are working with, and you just approach things in a different way. So as soon as all 10 languages are launched, and I hope that will be really soon, we are working with alternative sets of data that we've crawled from the gov.za domain, again, making sure that it's not offensive, that there aren't spelling mistakes, etc., etc. But once that has happened, it would really be amazing if at least one person from each language joins the community and make sure that things happen for that language. In many of the projects that I've worked on before, we've always tried to do the same thing for all 11 languages so that no language is left behind. And in as much as that is a very noble aim, it's a bit like trying to raise 11 children at the same time. You always forget the one at school, and then you forget to take the other one to athletics practice, and it's not possible to give that dedicated kind of attention that a single child would get. Of course, I've heard that there are disadvantages about single child, but that's not today's discussion. The point I'm really trying to make is if you are passionate about the language that you speak, then please join the effort. Please get your community mobilized, and let's see what we can do for the languages of South Africa. Mozilla has a very big international footprint. There are really exciting common voice stories from the rest of Africa. It's been extremely successful in Rwanda. You'll also see on the homepage that there's a lot of activity at the moment in Kiswahili. I think that was also supported by some of the funding from the Lacuna Fund that was dedicated to collecting speech data in Kiswahili. So it's not just us. There really is a huge network of people doing the same thing for their languages and working towards that shared goal of seeing technology in our indigenous languages. Okay, I think that's those are my thoughts for today. I'm open. I would like to have some discussion going, hear maybe what other people's experience is. The one thing that I have said is it's not a Stellenbosch University project. Stellenbosch University just managed to get the data to get the translation going. But if you do want to join and if you do want to get involved, just in some way, send me an email, let me know so that we at least know about each other and we can keep in touch. And that's just to make sure that the community grows. So thank you very much. And please, if there are any questions, let me know.
Okay, thanks for that, Febe. That was great. And then also, I think, providing context to the Common Voice project. I think sometimes I find myself speaking about it. I think I had some meetings yesterday on there, but then trying to give context, especially on the coverages across the continent and how they come in. This was very, very, very enlightening. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. And then I'll acknowledge you, and then you can then ask the question. I'll kick off, I guess, on this one. Okay, the fair use thing is going to be more and more of a bigger kind of, I think, discussion point within the African natural language processing community, because it's obviously going to it's a big obstacle to get over as we're working on there. There's one part on obviously working to get the copyright holders or the people who actually create the content to understand this. And then there's the other one, obviously, on getting researchers to also understand how to navigate this point. And yes, I think one of my biggest understandings just of that is the issue of republishing is the biggest one. So you can use, but then the republishing is where the things become a bit murky and all those things, and we don't, in some cases. But then maybe a question for you, and that's obviously it's recorded. How do you think about, again, when you have something like a public broadcaster, or you have a public service, so it could be government places that actually have content. My feeling there personally is that should always be fair game. It is not, especially for researchers who at the end of the day will be using an open license to redistribute. It's a very different thing if you don't have that mandate and you're a private organization, and then we can look at some of these other fair use things. But then if you have a public mandate, I think it's a very, very different.
Yeah, so I realize this is not a therapy session, but let me tell you a little story. As I said before the meeting started, I started working at Stellenbosch University in 2004, and one of the first things I did is that I wrote many letters to public broadcasters, to newspapers, to, I don't know, I still have a list of them. I'm now sort of keeping it as a souvenir. And one of those letters went to the SABC, and with a request to at least start using broadcast news, because that's it's an easy type of speech to process, because people read carefully, they don't argue like people do in Parliament. And after that letter, I think there have been in the order of magnitude of hundreds of letters between myself and the SABC, between the Department of Arts and Culture and the SABC, between the HLT expert panel and the SABC. And then a few years ago, when I was still with CSIR, there was actually a meeting between people from CSIR and the SABC. And I thought, well, after 15 years, this dream is going to come true. And I mean, do we have permission to use SABC data yet? No. So it's been, I mean, we tried top down, we tried bottom up. And so one of the first projects I did, I in the end ended up buying recordings of news bulletins from the archives at the SABC. I had to go to a little office somewhere in that big office in Brixton, knock on a door, somebody would write an invoice in a book with 2 pieces of carbon copy, you know, that type of thing. But at least the project got going. And we compiled a set of transcribed broadcast news bulletins in South African English, which is great and which is fine. And it was a nice project. But now I keep getting emails of people saying, can you share the data? And from a personal Febe De Wet point of view, so this is not the opinion of any of my current or previous employers, I would just like to give the data to anybody else who's interested in doing this research. Yeah. But because it's not mine to give, that data is still in my drawer. I haven't been able to share it with anybody. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I'll be clever and I'll just transfer the data to SADiLaR and make it their problem. Yeah. And as far as I know, SADiLaR is still negotiating with the SABC. And again, personal Febe De Wet opinion, that the data is in the public domain. It has been broadcast. Mm. I'm not going to start a radio station. Sure. I just want the data. And there's so much data out there. Exactly the same thing happened with Parliament. We wanted to create a corpus of transcribed parliamentary data. And initially very positive discussions. And again, I ended up, you know, buying DVDs in an office somewhere in the parliamentary buildings in Cape Town. That data is, if I remember correctly, at least that data has been released by SADiLaR. But again, a parliamentary discussion in the National Assembly, it's in the open domain. But then, you know, I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer. So maybe I've said enough already.
No, that's I think it's going to be obviously more discussion on these areas. Yeah, I think on some parts of our work, we also push maybe to think about this also as some forms of protest, is to say, hey, this should be made up, or like, and we also try on this case, I'm talking about the social impact research group. We've also been trying to navigate this point. Yeah. And it is something else. I will share a few links in the chat for people who are interested on some of the repos we've created, just to get people at least moving forward with, hey, here's something that comes from Parliament. It's available, and then if you want to do something with this, let us know. If you want to add your things, we don't own the copyright to the original content, but then we then release any annotations on top of that, then under a Creative Commons, so that people can then continue working within these spaces. But maybe first, Abby, do you want to ask your questions? Okay, I think, oh, go ahead, Abby. There we go. Hi, Abby. Okay, I'm going to assume Abby's having a problem with his mic. So he's asked about, he's interested in cross-model alignment on how we can develop finding embedding space between speech and text to learn respective modalities. Can we leverage kind of the data that you have to then do kind of cross embeddings between speech and text?
Yes, absolutely. As I said somewhere during my babbling, every now and again, Mozilla releases data sets, and in each release, you have both the prompt and the speech. Okay. All of the text that we are going to make available to Mozilla, we will also put up on SADiLaR, so that you can go to Sadilar and see this text dump was transferred to Mozilla for the Common Voice project in November 2022. And then it may take a little, if they do not release, matched text and audio, it may take a little bit of searching to align the audio and the text again. I haven't done that myself because I haven't worked with the Mozilla data because the languages I'm interested in is not there. But as far as possible, I'll make sure that everything that goes to Mozilla is also available on Sadilar and that we reconcile those in the end so that the matched audio and text is available to everybody in all 10 languages.
Cool. Thank you.
That answers your question.
Oh, I think it will.
Okay.
It makes sense in that case. Friedmore, I think your hand was up.
Yes, thanks a lot, and thanks, Phoebe, for the presentation. It's an area that of late, I've grown interest. I've been following, the NLP Africa with a passion. I haven't contributed anything, but it is my desire that in the next few months or so, I become quite active, and I'm still trying to navigate and see how I can, contribute. So mine will be a question that is mixed probably with a suggestion that, I'm looking at the fact that it said that isiNdebele it has a little presence there on Wikipedia, yet, we do have the Ndebele communities. Much of them, they are in Zimbabwe, some in South Africa. So I'm just wondering, what does it take, or should I say, what are the ethical obligations that, one has to meet, maybe to follow a model such as, going into the communities, identifying the actual isiNdebele communities, and then, campaign, mobilize, and invite people to actually generate this data, generate these, voices. What are the ethical obligations, to navigate that space? Because I think if people can get into the communities themselves, it will become maybe easier and quicker, to have maybe a day, block out a day where you are in the open space, you have your tools, and you mobilize people to do that. I'm not sure if there are any sort of maybe should I call them for the lack of the right term, should I say what am I saying now? The word
guidelines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So earlier in this week, there was a summer school in digital humanities organized by Sadilar. And one of the people who gave a presentation at the summer school was Bobby Shabangu from the South African Wikimedia Foundation. So I think the best place probably would be to start with the foundation, to speak to them about how they've approached these things. And then I think, communities are wonderful things, and in the end, that's where our strength lies. But I've also been involved in enough projects to know, the people have other things to do. They need to go to school, they need to go to work, they need to put food on the table, and there's just not enough time to sit down and now write a Wikipedia page because it's the right thing to do. So I think what you're suggesting is absolutely wonderful, and maybe that's something that we could try to also find some funding for. To identify again, are we going to do just isiNdebele, and then isiNdebele is our new favorite child, or do we do 10 workshops to make sure that all 10 languages are included? Those are usually the tricky questions that funders ask, but I think what you're suggesting is a very good idea, and that I think is what is needed to make sure that the language communities get involved. Because again, I don't want to arrive at these communities and tell them, right, today this is what we're going to do, because that's just not the approach that I think is appropriate.
Yeah. Thanks for the response. I just picked this in Ndebele, but you know, that could be generalized to other languages that
Yes,
are yeah, but thanks for the response. Yeah.
So if you do want to get involved, contact Bobby Shabangu, and then if you feel like organizing something like this, let me know. I think the more ideas we have, the better. You know, I've been around for a while, so my ideas are running out quickly, and it really helps to get some new ideas and new faces and new energy into the community.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think on that, like, I think maybe on one is it is true, Phoebe, that the challenge with Isidevele is obviously there's no Wikipedia, but I think I will we are working on releasing something hopefully by December that will allow people from kind of more government data that is aligned, like hopefully will be all aligned across all the 11 languages, and then that could be a place then to be able to pick up content that's used. So I'll let you know once that becomes available, and then if that can make, like you said, that's my wife's family's language, and it's a pet peeve in our household. So I'm like, why do I work on, like,
when can I meet your wife?
Yeah, I worked on Setswana first because that was my mother's language. Then I worked on like, you know, Xitsonga is something that we've been working on. There's still lots of work to do in that space. And then I think I even have a book that's in my office at home. I'm not allowed to return to the owner until I finish my work in Xitsonga. So because it's a Xitsonga, like, you know, multi-phrase book of saying that, no, only once you're done will you be allowed to actually do that. And then we're like, you know, the group has been working this year to cover as many of the other 9, like outside English and Afrikaans, 9 languages. So we are releasing as many as possible, because we thought, like, we have a kind of a time crunch on one side, and then we have to go through obviously all these obstacles. But I wanted maybe to recognize Kenosi. Kenosi, do you want to unmute and then ask your questions?
Sorry, I'm trying to find the mute button. Yeah, so I'm actually juggling at the moment. I was relating to the comment around juggling kids and all that. So I'm actually juggling at the moment. But my question, I was saying that I'm hi everybody. I'm new to the space. So I think I came to a lot of interest, like for financial services and healthcare applications. So my question is, with the process that's being followed, does it actually help to address the need in those kind of domain spaces, or would another process need to be followed for there to be for usefulness in those contexts as well?
The answer is yes, but it's also no. If you, for languages that don't have these humongous, and I won't mention names, types of data sets, usually if you work application driven, and that's also something that we have done in the past, it helps to have domain-specific vocabulary and domain-specific terminology, and it helps the ASR a lot if you know that people are not going to discuss soccer, they are going to talk about healthcare or financial issues. So we have taken that approach in the past, and I see you also ask about the relative developments and maturity across various languages. There have been 2 human language technology audits. The one was done quite a few years ago, if I remember correctly, 2008, thereabouts. And then there was one a bit more recently that reassessed the landscape to say, okay, which resources are available for which languages, which technologies are available, and so on and so forth. So you can get an idea. In terms of commercial offerings, my personal experience, and this is outdated knowledge, but you know, you usually see the big 5 and then the rest get left behind, because people don't develop things that they don't make money out of, which is fair enough. I mean, the economy of numbers has its place in the universe, but in terms of huge general development, only a few languages have been receiving attention. So if you are interested in more domain-specific solutions, it helps to collect those domain-specific data sets. I know about one company, Tesserae, I think they were called. I'm not sure if they're still up and running. They did work in the financial sector. And then the CSIR has made a few attempts at developing applications to facilitate communication in healthcare. There are also projects financed by Department of Arts and Culture, who don't specifically look at speech technology, but many of them look at bilingual dictionaries, trilingual dictionaries. I know at some stage there was a UCT student who just got this dictionary up and running so that they could use it in the hospital. But, you know, so there are little bits of information here and there, but not something, I can't put a URL up there that's going to take you to the doctor's friend that you can download on your phone and use to communicate in the healthcare domain. But I'd like to work on it if you can find money.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been very interesting over the last few years, and why this area is also becoming more and more fascinating, is that for Kenosi, that people now can just gather outside formal structures, work together, and then be able to actually do things that are great. So it does not necessarily need to be in general, the challenge is that we tend to get people to first deal with in terms of some of the ethics is obviously how people actually participate. Right. So it can be a thing where somebody participates and they don't understand that they're either giving away like, you know, their voice, or they're giving away their text in a way towards this. So if you got, let's say, people in health who are all like, you know, indigenous language speakers, and they said, hey, we want to do this for ourselves, and we're creating something where all of us are going to be credited. We're building it on this for the community to be able to take this forward. That's a bit different, like, you know, that's a place where you can do that. And then you just make sure that there's no harm. There's all these things that come in. And I would suggest you likely talk to a more seasoned researchers who can assist you in navigating kind of that space. And the same goes in finance in that way. And because of that, you don't need to look at the big kind of tech companies and think that they're the only ones who can do it. They're not really looking at some of these spaces because for them, it doesn't make financial sense to do that. But then it doesn't mean it shouldn't be done.
Exactly.
Right? That is a thing that people should understand. And we talk about this a lot, of why people should work in African natural language processing, is that you can make still huge strides in spaces that other people can't really turn around their whole organizations to look at. They would not do it. It doesn't make it. But then you can just bring a small team and be able to make such great progress. And just because you can, like, you know, bring people, as Febe said, who are passionate about the language and then are willing really to dig for longer within some spaces and really find some gems. Samuel.
Maybe just before we take Samuel's question, a small anecdote from the CSIR experience where they developed this speech-to-speech application, and the domain was specifically in obstetrics. And at some of the clinics they piloted, the nurses said, okay, but we can all speak these languages. It's the people from Eritrea that we can't understand. Why doesn't your application speak French? So, you know, once they were so proud of this local language thing. And then you get confronted with a slightly bigger language reality in our country. So just a small story from healthcare, and something to keep in mind also when, you know, when we do work on local applications.
Thank you. Samuel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a time. I'll begin by introducing myself. I'm Samuel Utunda. I'm from Rwanda, and I work at Digital Muganda. We were the ones who did the Kinyarwanda data collection. So yeah, I was interested when I heard that you're going to do for South Africa. And yeah, I had like 2 sections. The first is to share at least the work we did and some tips. And then the last one is maybe a question or a suggestion. Yeah, so yeah, I think you mentioned the same issue we had, like text data collection looks easy, but it's very hard because we took a long time. We started in 2019, but it took a long time to find enough text to collect. And we looked into news media from the government, and it didn't help. We did find some news, private news media that freely gave us the data. That helped, but it was not enough. And then we resorted to use the community to write the text. So communities had to write. We make sure we give them some topics, and then they write based on the topics. So it's maybe something you can use. And then also for the communities, we did find some, one of our most contributors were from religious organizations. So like churches, because most of the work in African languages is translated, the Bible is translated into African languages. So you do find they do have some literacy. And then we reached out to the Jehovah Witnesses groups, and they really helped us in the data collection, both writing text and also contributing. So that's also something to look into. And then we also had a title of Commoniers. So we call them Commoniers as common voice, and their role was to help sensibilize and get more people for data collection. But then one of the challenges we had was access to the internet. So some of the collaborators did not have access to the internet, so we had to support in that area. So that can be something. As for my question/suggestion, I know South Africa has a lot of official languages, and I was thinking, in the data collection, will there be a way to do some parallel data sets, which means a word translated in the 11 languages, which can later be used, let's say, for speech-to-speech translation? And I think also, since like it can be something we can think in terms of the Difindawa and also Masakane, of how to help for speech-to-speech translation, like creating the data sets for African languages, because I think that's one of the domains that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those comments, and thank you for joining. It's actually, I do feel a bit, what's the right word? Talking about this project in the presence of somebody who has the experience of Rwanda is makes me feel very humble. Thank you for those comments. The internet access thing we've already encountered with the translation of the websites. Some of the agencies that we spoke to said, the people who work for them don't have uninterrupted access to internet, and that is required if you want to use the Pontoon tool. So we already had to set up internet hubs for the translators who didn't have internet access that facilitated the Pontoon tool. In terms of the parallel corpora, yes, that's something that I'm particularly excited about. We have, there's a project running in South Africa on WordNet. They have tried to set up an African WordNet, and they have pledged their definitions and usage examples to the project. And at least the definitions, because the definitions are structured according to a specific word list. Okay, let me start the story a little bit earlier. They initiated the African WordNet by using the synsets in the Princeton WordNet, and they very quickly ran into lexicalization issues. There were some trees growing on the northern slopes of some mountains in northern Canada that were simply not relevant in Tshivenda. So they then took a step back and said, all right, so how do we initiate these word nets without spending 80% of the time on inventing new words for trees that are of no interest to people in South Africa? Well, they are of interest, but you know what I'm saying. So they reverted to using a word list, the SIL word list that was developed by linguists working in Northern Africa. The list is available in English and French, and people have been using those for field work in linguistics to try and stick with very basic topics. And interestingly enough, I've recently had a look at the No Language Left Behind C data set that was created by the same team from Meta that are working on the Flores data set. And many of those topics actually overlap. So it's about very general topics. So they use that list to bootstrap, if you want, the African word nets. And they've now pledged their definitions and usage examples to the project. So at least the definitions can be used as a parallel corpus. And there have been other small contributions. Sadilar, for instance, has a biannual newsletter that appears in all 11 languages, and that can be structured as a parallel corpus. We'll use those to collect speech. And then there are 1 or 2 people who have worked on online courses, writing, reading, general literacy, and so on, who also have material available in all 11 languages, and where we can, if we make the prompts available and we record the speech, we also have parallel speech corpora. Exactly how we're going to, and I think that refers back to the very first question, how we're going to, from the Mozilla data release, get the audio and revert back to the parallel text corpora that we started off with, because the text is randomized when it's uploaded to the platform. There'll be a little bit of thinking work to do there, but I'm sure that it can be done. And I mean, we are not married to the platform. I absolutely foresee a situation where we can even do those collections outside the platform to make sure that we keep the match between the text and the speech in both languages, and that we can align the speech, the utterances with each other. But thank you, it's a very good suggestion. I'll think about that. And thank you also for the other suggestions. They are good to keep in mind. Maybe just as from past experience, for community involvement, did you offer any incentives? Because I often find that that's a tricky one.
Yeah, we did offer like incentives, but more of internet transport. Yeah, that's the kind of incentives we offer.
Okay.
Okay. No, yeah, thanks very much, Phoebe, for really giving this insightful talk. And I can see, obviously, the discussions were were also very, very enlightening on this part. I have shared what our YouTube page is. I've also shared like a new data set that's also come out in isiZulu and Seswati news. There will hopefully, before the end of the year, be also a Chivenda and Sepedi news corpus that we're releasing for people to be able
great.
That's categorized properly, and then we're hoping to see very nice transfer learning work coming out in the near future within those spaces. As I said, we still have to finalize the last speaker on here. We had invited somebody, we're just waiting for them to confirm, and then that could be it again for this year. Just remember, we only have our seminars in the second half of the year, just so that we have a time to breathe in the first half of the year, just to make it a little bit so. And because of that, I think we can bring, as I said, like the kind of high quality of speakers and discussions that we do have at this time of the year, all like, every year. This is like the 4th year we're running this, and it's really been great. Thanks again to Phoebe. Thanks to everybody who was able to make it in this morning. And yeah, do keep pushing, and let's finish the year in a good way. If you can take care of somebody else out there and making sure that they are fine given this time, please do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.